Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, SQF Codes Edition 9, Food Safety and Quality Code Key Changes and Updates. My name's Amy. I'm a member of the marketing team here at Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc., and I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support to our speakers. We are very excited to be welcoming Leanne Chuboff from SQF for today's webinar, and I'll be introducing her to you all a little later on in the webinar. But before we get underway, I want to take care of a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all participants are on mute. However, we do absolutely still want to take your questions. So if you think of anything, any curiosities you have regarding the new edition of SQF code, please go ahead and open up the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel, type that question in and click send. We will answer as many of them as possible once we finish the prepared slides. The two biggest questions we usually get are regarding a recording of the webinar or downloadable slides. And the answer is yes, both of those will be available. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search for Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc. on YouTube, and the channel should be among the first things to pop up. And the slides will be available from our website at PJRFSI.com. And just to show you quickly how the questions tab may look on your screen, it could be different depending on, which type of computer you're on. But just type your question right in there and then click send, and we will answer, like I said, as many as we can at the end. Now, just to get us a little jump started and see who is on the call today, we've got a quick polling question for all of you in the audience. And that has to do with your current certification status. Are you currently certified to a GFSI standard? Maybe you're certified with PJRFSI here, or maybe another certification body, or maybe you're looking to become certified, and this webinar is a way for you to learn more about the process. So just choose whatever response suits you best. All responses to these polling questions that we'll have throughout the presentation are anonymous, so no one can see how you responded in the moment. So just choose what works best, and once we've got some responses in, I will move right along into the presentation. All right, we've got a great amount of votes coming in, so thank you all so much for participating. And it looks like the majority of the people on this call are certified to a GFSI standard, which is always great to see. Thank you so much for your responses. Moving right along without further ado, I want to introduce Paul Demarin, the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain at PJRFSI. Paul has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. He joined us back in January of this year. Before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 15 years in the certification industry with clients in pretty much every sector, from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul has worked for many years in management systems certification as well. And prior to that, Paul was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So Paul, I'm going to let you take it away, and you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you joining. As Amy mentioned, my name is Paul, and I look after our food safety and supply chain and now cybersecurity division for PJR and PJRFSI. We have a lot to unpack today during the webinar, so that's going to start off with a very short overview of who we are as a company, followed by an introduction to SQFI. We'll then move on to the star of the show, where we're going to look at the SQF Standard Edition 9, and Leanne will go through a summary of changes for us. Following that, I'm going to be very excited to have my colleague, Lauren Maloney, who's going to host an open discussion with Leanne about some of the hot topics and questions that we as a CB have and that we feel are going to be valuable for you and are really top of mind in the industry right now, including COVID and virtual audits. So through this, as you see, we're going to do a couple of polling questions as well, and then we're going to open it up for audience Q&A at the end. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Leanne Chuboff, who's the VP of Technical Affairs with SQFI, and as I mentioned, Lauren Maloney, who is PJRFSI's Accreditation Manager. So let's move right on here. Just to kind of give you a quick overview, PJR was founded in 1994 by Perry Johnson himself, and we've really been at the forefront of certification and registration from the very beginning. We achieved multiple accreditations from ANAB to UCAS, and that started in 1995. We started expanding overseas in 1999 and have continued that to date. And we are now a global organization with offices all around the world in about 20 countries. We have auditors on the ground in about 60 countries. And in 2005, Perry Johnson & Associates was founded, and that's our healthcare and technology company. And they specialize in telemedicine, virtual scribing, medical coding. As I mentioned, PJR's creation was in 1995. We also founded PJLA, which is the laboratory accreditation business, in 1999. And in 2012 is when PJRFSI was born as a result for the demand in the industry of third-party certifications and accreditations. We're headquartered in Troy, Michigan, as I mentioned, a global company. And the program and suite of services that we have really range everywhere from registration, testing, and certification to standards like HACCP and GFSI, organic, gluten-free, cannabis, hemp, social responsibility, etc. So moving on, we currently, over the last 8 years or so, have been supporting really every type of industry and company and sector that's out there. We work with the processors, the retailers, the distributors, farms, importers, exporters, and the main goal is to work with them to help manage food safety and supply chain risk, as well as quality and brand protection requirements. We're really certainly committed here to value-added food safety certification, but really one of the things that our team does is we take it from customer service to customer focus, because we believe that there's quite a big difference there with respect to that. And we try and uphold the high standards of our professionalism and technical competence integrity throughout the life cycle of the audit. So talking a little bit more about our services, as the slide here points out, the certification industry is still deemed an essential service because it's based on the results of tests, inspections, and audits, and it really gives confidence to you and me as the consumer that an organization's products are being evaluated against international accepted national standards by a competent third party. As we all know, it's certainly not business today. There are many required changes to how our businesses are operating and running during this time. But at the end of the day, our goal is to still provide a high quality service while keeping everybody safe in doing so. So really in today's market, this is even more critical. The landscape is continually changing. It's a dynamic place. You know, there's more recalls and regulations that seem to be popping up. And what we're all dealing with right now is affecting all types of organizations, regardless of scope and size. So as a result, our services are defined into 4 key areas: first party, second party, third party, and training. First party audits are audits that our customer owns the audit checklist or protocol. They've written it. A good example would be a McDonald's SQMS platform that they've written a standard and CB's audit to that. Second party would be schemes that we as the CB own, so cannabis, hemp, GMP, GDP, HACCP, and then third party would be all of our accredited solutions. So this just kind of gives you an idea or an overview of some of the programs. We have about 30 standards that we currently support today. These are all different types of audits in the industry: accredited, unaccredited, client specific, government regulated, retailer mandated. And as I mentioned, we have worked with pretty much every type of organization that's out there. Happy to say that from a cannabis, hemp, and CBD perspective, we're the only CB globally who was approved by ANAB, and our standards are now accredited for that. So congratulations to Lauren and her team for making that happen. You know, as a third party, all of the standards that we audit to are accredited under 17065 or ISO 17021, and these are the standards that govern certification bodies. We do a lot of work and actually led the way for many of these programs with government programs like FSMA for the Food Safety Modernization Act, the FSVP standards, as well as the Voluntary Qualified Imported Program, or VQIP. And then just finally here, I just want to talk a little bit about our accreditation. We have longstanding relationships with many accreditation bodies and scheme owners around the world, like SQF. The accreditation gives our customers assurance that PJRFSI and our family of companies operate under the rules of accreditation, and scheme owners and that helps to regulate us and maintain the highest quality of our work. So on many occasions, like we're doing today with SQF, we aim to partner with these groups to ensure that as soon as we get the most up-to-date information, we pass that along to our customers. And we're doing that for the rest of the year as well, where we have one going every week. So typically where a certification body, we come and audit you, the accreditation bodies and scheme owners come and audit us throughout the year. It's a very large investment that's made by not only our company, but every certification body. But it's well worth it, because at the end of the day, you can have confidence that you're partnering with a recognized and respected partner. So just before I pass it over to Leanne, I just want to say thank you, excuse me, again for everybody. It's still a time of great change right now that we're going through. It was only 8 months ago that this all began. We're still, in my opinion, at the very beginning of all of this, and we need to continue executing the plans that you have in place for post-COVID-19. And that can certainly include pivots to your business model, your operations, your supplier policies, technologies, and even your workforce. This is still a time of great change that we're all going through. So, it's time to really ensure that you execute and lay out those plans and, help to build the confidence of not only your customers and suppliers, but stakeholders and employees as well. So at that point, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the rest of it, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Amy.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. Right before I introduce Leanne to you all, I've got another polling question. And that has to do with what you might have already heard about the changes coming to edition 9. So what's your biggest concern? Choose whatever option suits you best. Like I said before, if you joined us late, all responses to these polls are anonymous, so feel free to answer as you wish. And for those of you who may have come in late, if you have any questions that may come up during Leanne's portion of the slides or her discussion with Lauren later on, please feel free to type a question into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel. And as Paul mentioned, we will be answering as many as we can live after the slides have been finished. So once we get a few more votes in, go ahead and participate. I will go ahead right into introducing Leanne to you all. All right, thank you all so much for your responses. And it looks like the overwhelming majority is regarding preparation for audits. So hopefully Leanne has some good advice, or even if you want to ask specific questions, go ahead, like I said, and type those questions right into the questions tab. All right, moving right along, I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Leanne Chuboff of SQFI. Leanne has over 30 years of food service experience, specializing in supply chain, food safety, and quality assurance, and is responsible for the technical elements of the SQF program, including the development, maintenance, and technical support of the SQF program. Leanne is active with many organizations, including GFSI, AFDO, and the International Association for Food Protection. She sits on several committees in an effort to enhance policy and develop programs for the industry to help protect public health. So without further ado, Leanne, I'm going to hand it off to you, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Paul and Lauren. Thank you very much for inviting SQF to present today on edition 9. There is a lot to talk about. Here we go. So what I will be talking about today is edition 9, the objectives and timeline that we have established. So what were our objectives going into the code, and our release and implementation dates. And then I want to give you just a brief overview of the technical working groups that we developed in order to create the documents that we're presenting to you today. And then the key changes. So what were, based off of our process, what were some of those frequently commented on code requirements? So initially, when we went into the revision process, which is prompted by primarily by when GFSI has a change in their benchmarking requirements, then it's going to drive us into a revision change. So when we were thinking about what did we want to do with this revision change, we look at previous submissions and inquiries and questions and suggestions on how we could better outline the code itself. So we looked at the architecture and the structure of the codes. We wanted to look to see how were the food sector categories lined up as it relates to the modules and the codes. So could we look at food sector categories? Could we align the modules up a little bit better to streamline the farm to fork solution? And then we also wanted to look at, there were a number of code requirements that were duplicated, that had in various parts of the code itself, and we wanted to consolidate that again to create a more streamlined approach. So when the supplier, when the site reviews the code requirements, it's a better process in understanding how they should be implemented. Because a lot of people don't or forget this, is that the code is written for the supplier, for the site, for the site that's implementing the SQF food safety program. It's not for the auditor, it's not for the CB, it's not for SQF, it's for the site. So the code was designed to provide those requirements that a site should have in place to demonstrate that they have a strong food safety system. And that's basically what it is. So we wanted to look at how could we streamline the code requirements to fit that need. And then of course we have to meet GFSI. We have to consider all of our stakeholder input. So SQF's parent organization is FMI, or the Food Industry Association, and it's a retailer and also brand owner member-based organization. And they provide us a lot of feedback as to what do they see as challenges in their supply chain. And then of course we have to look at our auditor, consultant, trainer, technical reviewer, witness auditor, all those protocols and criterias that support the code and the implementation of the code. But overall, what we wanted to get was a more focused audit to get better audit outcomes. And how can we do that? And those were our objectives. So this started 18 months ago. We started the planning, and when Paul said, we've been trying times for the past 8 months, I was like, 8 months, what is he talking about? And I swear the pandemic seems like it just happened yesterday. I don't know where these 8 months went, but I was not in that mindset. So, and then I look back at this timeline, I was like, this happened, all started 18 months ago. So 18 months ago, we started assembling the code requirements. If you were at SQF conference last year, we actually had a stakeholder survey and stakeholder breakout groups. So we got some really good feedback from that stakeholder breakout groups and the survey. We developed technical working groups. We created drafts. We published for public comment. We revised, all that kind of good stuff. And we're ready to publish the codes. They'll be released tomorrow, Friday, October 23rd, with the implementation date in 7 months of May 24th, 2021. So that's our timeline and objectives. So I did want to just say thanks to all of our technical working group members. Our technical working group members really, if it wasn't for all of our technical working groups, we wouldn't have had the outcome that we have with all the different codes that we created. So while SQF has a very strong technical team, we rely on the industry to provide their feedback and input in building our codes, because it's the industry, the certification bodies, the training centers, the sites themselves, the auditors, and many thanks to Perry Johnson and their contributions in helping us develop our codes as well, and participating on our working groups, because again, it's the industry leaders like Perry Johnson that gives us the opportunity to build the codes that we do right now. So definitely appreciate all that. So I just kind of wanted to give a little shout out to our technical working group members. Okay, oops. Sorry, went too far. Okay, so here they are kind of in a nutshell, just a quick layout. So if you look on the left, those are the code covers to edition 9. And we have our primary, food manufacturing, storage and distribution, food packaging, quality, retail, food service, and fundamentals. On the right is how the layout of edition 9 will go. So what we did is we took the primary code, and we have 3 individual codes now all those food sector categories remain the same. So livestock is still FSC1. Primary plant production now includes multiple food sector categories because we included greenhouses, growing houses, sprouts, microgreens. We put in primary plant production, we put in pack houses as well. So you'll see that the primary plant productions food sector categories grew, but it was consolidated into that one code. And aquaculture is its own separate code. So we have 3 different independent codes for primary, which supports food safety, the system elements for each of those industry codes, and really address the risks of that industry. Same for food manufacturing. If you look at animal product manufacturing, now that's its own code. So slaughter all the way through meat processing and seafood processing is all in its own code. Food manufacturing, food sector categories haven't changed. So it includes all of the traditional food sector categories where most of our certificates are. Dietary supplements is its own code because now it has the CFR 111 requirements in it. Pet food and animal feed are its own independent codes as well, and looks at the risk for that particular industry scope for pet food as the risks to the pet as well as the risks to the human. And same thing with animal feed, where you look at the feed that is supporting the animal that then goes to human consumption. Storage and distribution, food packaging, still its own codes. Quality, little different. So quality is still an independent code. The substance of quality hasn't changed. We still rely on implementing process controls to control variation. And we also require the quality plan and to be HACCP based. And so that still hasn't changed. The only change that we've really made in the quality code is the language. And what we are doing with the quality code now is opening it up to any GFSI recognized standard. So now any GFSI program can use the quality code, because we found there is a lot of sites that were using our quality code. And so we thought, well, why not give the opportunity to audit against that quality code? Food retail, food service, and fundamentals, there is no change, and really no immediate change to in the future. That won't be updated until next year sometime. And here are our code covers. So we put together some new code covers to represent our new edition of edition 9. And we have icons and code covers for all of our codes that are out there. Okay, so here are the key changes to edition 9. And I'll start with part A, go to the system elements, the PRPs, and then the code specific changes. So in part A, the scoring is the biggest change in part A, where we changed a major from 10 points as a score to 5 points deduction in your overall audit score. So we looked at this, how auditors were issuing major nonconformances, and there was a huge discrepancy between minors and majors that were issued by auditors. And really, of all of our nonconformances, major nonconformances were issued less than 2% of the time. Criticals, my gosh, less than 0.0001% of the time. So we took a look at the major and the point value that was associated with it. And for us, a major nonconformance is means more than just the point deduction. But what a major nonconformance means, it's indicating that there's a system element breakdown, that there's a systemic issue that is occurring at the site. And it means more to that site, because then they'll look at that systemic issue and look at it holistically versus just as a one-off, like, you know, I need to make sure my pest control stations are in place, or, you know, there's a hand washing, you know, the paper towel dispenser wasn't filled. But instead, we wanted auditors to look at sites and get better audit outcomes when you look at something holistically. So we felt that the points was a distraction to issuing these major nonconformances. And what we want is auditors to be more, look at the big picture and then understand whether a major should be issued or not. So we're not looking at scores to change, you know, dramatically, because ideally, if majors weren't, we should have still less than 2% if the scoring was done correctly in edition 8. We also removed the requirements for stage 1 desk audits for initial certifications. Some love this, some hate it. I don't know, it doesn't mean that the certification body can't do a pre-assessment. However, it's not required as part of SQF's program anymore. We did include remote activities in there. So, as Paul said, the world is changing and we're all changing very fast with it. So we put in policies in place for remote activities, and we just published our fully remote audit as well. But so remote activities in the code consider a hybrid approach where you have partial on-site and partial off-site when it comes to auditing the code requirements. And then we just really provided clarification for when a site is suspended or fails an audit. So we provided an if-then table, and it just creates clarity among the user, the site itself, as well as the certification body. So there's consistent implementation for that when that happens. As it relates to the system elements, and I'll go into further detail in some of my other slides, but basically there was clarification to many of those system elements. We did a great job of consolidating to remove all the duplication in the code requirements. And we looked at food fraud and food defense. Training was consolidated. Even when you look at the PRPs, many of the GMPs were consolidated. A couple changes. Backup practitioner is now required, so a substitute practitioner. So under the requirements of 2114 and 2115, which was previously 2124 and 2125. But so that is an added requirement. We added food safety culture. I'll save that for the next slide. Internal and external laboratory testing now includes that the testing methods have to fall under 17025 regardless if it's an internal or an external lab. So, you think sites aren't prepared for this, but we already have proficiency testing in the code. So if you're an existing site, there's not much change there. You had to have good laboratory practices under module 11, and you had to have proficiency testing being conducted as well. So you should be really on the right pathway as it relates to that requirement. And we did add a couple more, or just one more tweak to the recall withdrawal, the testing of that system, and that our expectations is that the site is going to use different testing methods. So oftentimes sites use the same method. I have a recall of an incoming ingredient, I can trace it back and I can contact my customers, test is done. However, there really needs to be a little bit more creativity in testing this. So truly challenging it is, maybe it's not just a product, but maybe it's a supplier's product, supplier's product, so we're in how can you test the traceability and recall system a little bit differently so it's not the same test over and over again. The PRP elements, there were a lot of rearranging of the PRP elements. When you look at how we rearranged many of these elements to be more consolidated. So building and materials, it has been changed and realigned. We looked at like little tweaks to the language. So instead of hand washing basins, we call them hand washing stations now. There was some references to quality in there that we removed. We did add, a little bit extra, clothing and when to change clothing, based off sets of frequency and stuff like that. So there is some additional requirements in there, but a lot of it has just been some rearranging in there. And then for the code specific, so some of the other codes like storage and distribution, feed, food packaging, as well as primary. So in storage and distribution, and feed, those food safety plans are now HACCP-based or hazard and risk management, or you could use preventive controls. So we took some liberties there because GFSI wasn't requiring Codex HACCP. So we did phrase it a little bit differently. Pet food allergens are no longer mandatory, and actually we changed allergens to identity preserved food. So looked at label claims like grain-free in the pet food industry. Primary produce, CAPA requirements, as well as water requirements, and addressing the romaine outbreak that we had last year and couple of years, actually within the past 2 years. So those romaine outbreaks, and looking at CAFOs, those concentrated animal feeding operations, and the relationship to the leafy green field. And also environmental monitoring requirements for indoor ag and pack house. Food packaging clarified the environmental monitoring requirements, and like I said, the quality code can be used with any of the GFSI recognized programs that are out there. Okay, I think we're ready for poll question number 3.
Yeah, that's right. We've just got one more really quick before Leanne continues with her presentation. And this one has to do with, it's more of an opinion question. In your opinion, how many times, how frequently should SQF update their code? So just choose whatever option here is closest to how you feel. And once we've gotten enough responses, we'll move right along. We've had a bunch of people join in since my last little message to you all. So just a reminder, get those questions typed into the questions tab, and we would love to answer whatever you have to ask at the end of the slides. All right, so we've got a great amount of participation from everybody, so thank you all so much. Let me just go ahead and see how we all voted. So there's our responses. And Leanne, I'll hand it back over to you.
I'm surprised about those 6% that want it every year. So we were kind of on that track for a while, but our goal now is to try and minimize those 0.1s, 0.2s, etc. So I just, I kind of, was trying to get some ideas as to when we should update the code. And I think for us, we want to try and follow the GFSI benchmark release of that document, as well as anytime there's a potential emerging issue that we need to immediately address in the code, that might prompt an addition change or a version change, So this is a complete addition change, but there could be some version changes, and that's where you get the 0.1s, the 0.2s, etc. So I'm glad there was like that mixed bag out there, not just me. Okay, so what I want to do is, since we don't have a lot of time, and and I just kind of want to focus on what those most frequently commented code requirements are and how we got in the interpretation of this, and maybe this would prompt some of your questions as well. But the first, well, just to kind of let you know, when we publish our code for public comment, we got, oh gosh, about 230 comments, or 230 submissions, meaning individuals submitted. Now, of course, not everybody just had one comment, but on average, we had about almost 4 comments per submission. So that's over 800 comments that we had, and that we rifled through, and that we identified. And many of those comments actually prompted change because of the feedback that we got. So I think that it's such a valuable part of the process, is that public comment period. So I appreciate, again, anybody that took the time to provide a comment. So these are the ones that we had the most frequently commented on code requirements. The first one was on food safety culture. And basically the concern, and it wasn't really a comment on, I think you should change the language to be XYZ. It was more about, how is this going to be audited? How will the auditor audit against this code requirement? Because food safety culture isn't a tangible thing sometimes. And you could look to see what's their communication plan, how do they, engage employees? Do the employees have the knowledge and the courage to stop the line or identify food safety issues? And the auditor can look at those specific areas, but oftentimes it's more about that culture and the continuous improvement in that food safety journey, and how is that going to be audited against it? And that's the biggest concern that we have. The ambient air testing was another most commented on area. And in ambient air testing, our initial proposal was that we make it a requirement for all sites, so that all sites shall have their atmospheric air tested annually, just for potential risks and threats. And the feedback overwhelming was this doesn't apply to all sites. This doesn't apply to my site. There is no potential pathogens that would be for food safety. So it wouldn't apply to my site. So it actually resulted in a change because of the feedback that we move it to high risk sites, and it's risk based. So it's high risk sites. It's an annual program that looks to see, are there any changes in the air that would lead a potential threat or risk to food safety. So now this was moved into high risk sites, 11.7.1.2. Contract manufacturers was another code requirement that was most frequently asked about. And mainly, it wasn't so much, so we added a little bit extra language in contract manufacturers. So we added that low risk suppliers shall be evaluated, and that would need any GFSI benchmark standard. High risk suppliers need to, that didn't change. It has to be audited by third party or by the site itself to meet the SQF code requirements. But we added third party storage and distribution businesses in there as well. So we added a little extra language in there, but that wasn't the question. So mainly it was clarification on how GFSI benchmark standards can be used to evaluate contract manufacturers. So using a GFSI benchmark standard it is applicable for high risk sites, but the site still has to understand how does the site meet the SQF code requirements, because contract manufacturers are representing that SQF certified site. So there needs to be some due diligence on that certified site as to how they are managing their contract manufacturers, and that's the requirement. So that part hasn't changed much. What we did is add clarification language for low risk suppliers, as well as third-party storage and distribution businesses. The other most frequently code requirement is on internal laboratories. So you can almost imagine the questions that we had with that is, does my internal lab need to be 17025, accredited to 17025? So everybody said, get rid of it, get rid of it. Well, some of these are mandated. Food safety culture and GFSI, they've included this in the benchmarking requirements document. Therefore, we have to include it into our requirements as well. So, but just to kind of answer some of those questions flat out, is that your internal laboratory does not have to be 17025. It's the methods that you use for your internal testing and analysis for food safety that has to be against and meeting those 17025 practices. Proficiency testing, good laboratory practices, your general overall management and food safety practices that you have under the SQF program also fall and support 17025, but it's not your internal lab that has to be accredited. It just, the practices and the methods for your food safety testing has to meet the requirements, many of those requirements under 17025. So that's what it is. And so I just want that to be clear, that your laboratory does not have to be accredited to 17025, number one, and number two, that that the tests are only food safety tests as it relates to the SQF food safety code. So pH, any type of pathogen testing, or even indicator organisms, if you're using that as an indicator for a pathogen, then that would have to fall under those practices falling under 17025. And then the last one we get is on label reconciliation. So there was a new little piece added to 2162 for product identification. And we ask that there's documented and implemented procedures to ensure that the correct product is in the correct package with the correct label, and that changeover is inspected and approved by an authorized person, and that procedures are implemented to ensure that the label use is reconciled and any inconsistencies investigated and resolved. And why did we do that is, I'm sure you can guess, recalls, label reconciliation is the #1 reason for recalls. It's the wrong products in the wrong box, and oftentimes it's allergen that's missing, an allergen statement. So we put more emphasis on label control in this recent edition for edition 9. Oops. Thanks, wrong one. So I wanted to break out these two for us to discuss today. And again, perhaps you have some questions about that. And I wanted to put out the specific code requirement and what we're put in edition 9. So under food safety culture, you could see that this is our new requirement 2112. It states that senior site management shall lead and support a food safety culture within the site. And it ensures that it ensures that the site has in place these 6 areas. So basically, you can see that many of these are already supported were already supported in edition 8 and 8.1. Adequate resources, food safety practices, that staff is informed and held accountable. So there was some tweaking and some additional language added, like staff is empowered to resolve and positively encouraged to notify. So all of that is all part of what we see as that food safety culture and those requirements. Now, to get more information on food safety culture, I would recommend that you go to GFSI's website, mygfsi.com. There's a white paper, an entire white paper committed and developed by a technical working group created by GFSI that outlines a process and a procedure for creating and implementing, sustaining, and maintaining a food safety culture in your site. So you can go to gfsi.com or mygfsi.com and download that white paper. And there's a short version and a long version. Read the long version. There's some, even if you think you have a food safety culture, you can always improve on food safety culture. If you've heard me before, I always say it's not the destination, it's the journey we're focused on, and it's the continuous improvement in food safety that we really want to emphasize. The second element that I wanted to talk about is contract manufacturers. And contract manufacturers, because again, this was one of the most commented on, we added, as you can see, if you look at sub-bullet 2, state that low risk, so products and processes of co-manufacturers that are considered low risk meet the requirements of the SQF Food Safety Code for manufacturing or other GFSI benchmark certification programs and regulatory and customer requirements. So we did add that clarification in for low risk. So high risk still has to undergo an audit by the site or third-party agency to confirm compliance with the SQF Food Safety Code. So that hasn't changed, bullet 1. Bullet 2 a little bit. And then you look at 2.3.3 regarding contractual arrangements for third-party storage and distribution businesses. So we are also looking at contractual arrangements for those if it's applicable. So it's not, might not be applicable, but includes requirements relating to customer product requirements with our clause under 2.3.3.2 for contract manufacturers. So we added that clause in there. So I just kind of wanted to share the language for these two because these were really one of the 2 most commented on code requirements. Okay, so that wraps up my portion. I just have a couple slides and then Lauren and I have a discussion that we'll have and then take some of your questions. So I did want to encourage you to come to SQF Global. Perry Johnson will be there. And on my next slide, really, there's a lot of engagement that you can do. And Perry Johnson has been really instrumental in sparking the movement for our I Am SQF campaign. So I really appreciate that. But we'll be celebrating 25 years. SQF had their birthday in September. And we'll be celebrating 25 years. There'll be more detail on edition 9. And I know it's a virtual event, and I feel like some of us are virtualed out, but this platform that we have for SQF Global is an amazing platform, very intuitive, lots of opportunities for engagement. There's video chats, like you just kind of pop in and be like, hey, you want a video chat? Or there's collaboration rooms, there's areas, you know, you can meet one-on-one with the sponsors. So there's a lot of opportunity. It's a very engaging platform. You know, it's not Zoom, it's not Adobe, it's not WebEx. It's a very engaging and intuitive platform. So take a peek at our website, sqfglobal2020.com. You could look at the agenda, and you could look to see how can you get engaged with the program, with SQF Global. So good news is you can register right up to the last day because it's online there. So there's a lot of sessions on edition 9 at SQF Global. So you can go once you log in, or even if you go to our agenda, you can see that we have a lot of sessions. And I want to emphasize too, it's called SQF Global for a reason, is that we are spanning 2 hemispheres, Australia, Japan, China, and then Latin America, US, Canada, all our key markets will be participating. We have presenters representing the globe, and I think it's just such an exciting event. We really took advantage of the pandemic opportunity and said, you know, if we're going to have a global event, let's have a global event, and let's encourage all of our stakeholders globally to participate. So here are some of the edition 9 breakout sessions: an overall session on code breakers, food safety cultures, in-house testing, co-mans, the other codes like primary storage, a more deeper dive in there, remote audits, collaboration rooms, office hours. So there's all kinds of ways to engage to learn about edition 9. And here's where Perry Johnson took the lead and really put together this dynamic video about IMSQF, and went all global on us and got representation from all across the globe, and really sparked the challenge to the other CBs and everybody else, because we've gotten quite a few videos in since then. So be a part of our community. Just go to sqfglobal.com, and there's an IMSQF webpage. Honest, it's so easy. All you have to do is click on the video booth. You enter in some information, name, company, email, and you just record your 2-minute session. Or 1 minute, 30 seconds. Even if you just want to take a selfie, just use, you know, go in there and participate with that. So I'd love to see your videos, even if you said, I saw Leanne and she made me do this. So that would be very fun. So hope to see you at IMSQF as well. And with that, I think, Lauren, you and I are going to start our chat.
Yeah, let me go ahead and let me thank you, first of all, Leanne, for all that awesome info. Really a lot of great new things coming with the new edition. So I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly introduce Lauren Maloney for this little fireside chat. Lauren Maloney is our Food Safety and Supply Chain Accreditation Manager here at PJRFSI. She has an extensive and really diverse background in the field of sustainable agriculture and food production. She has an MS in Conservation Biology from the University of Michigan and brings a wealth of knowledge to PJRFSI. As the accreditation manager, she oversees all of our food programs globally, including SQF, BRC, Primus GFS, Global Gap, Canada Gap, and FSSC, just to name a few. So Lauren, go ahead and strike us off. I think you've got the first question there.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy, and thanks, Leanne. Really excited to have you here today. Just a couple of questions for you, and I'll be answering some as well. But I want to start off with, you know, thanking you for the overview of SQF in Edition 9. We really appreciate our partnership with SQF and look forward to many more sessions. So the question for you is how and why, talk to me a little bit about the how and why behind Edition 9. Can you walk us through the process that you went through as a scheme owner to plan, prepare, and execute it, as I'm sure a lot of things went on behind the scenes to get this done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, I kind of alluded to that in my presentation regarding the technical working groups and getting all the technical content in there, but it doesn't stop with that. Our plan is to have we have a new look and feel to the code, so a new insides to it per se. So there's more white space and easier font, and so our marketing team is really working hard in developing the best product visually as well as technically accurate in there. So still a lot of work is going on, even last minute, trying to get everything organized and get the codes published. But you kind of saw the outside, a new cover, but really, we really rely on the technical experts out in the industry, the public feedback, as well as our technical working groups to build the content. So I have a question for you based off edition 9. How is Perry Johnson getting ready to train and prepare your auditors or your clients for edition 9?
Yeah, that's a great question, Leanne. So we are very excited about edition 9. So we have included in our annual auditor training that will take place December this year. Typically it's an in-person training, but this year it'll be virtual. And so we will not only go over those details, but it'll include a presentation from SQF to all of our auditors. And then we require auditors to also have any SQF edition 9 training, like professional update as well. As for our sites, this webinar is our first initiative in helping our sites prepare and understand edition 9 requirements. And we will also be including it in our coming PJRFSI newsletter, as well as sending out edition 9 emails to all of our current clients describing the summary of changes and the implementation timeline. And then finally, PJRFSI has recently partnered with PCR Corporation. They are a licensed SQF training body that will offer a range of virtual public food safety training courses for edition 9, and course information can be found on our website. So I have another question for you, Leanne. I'm sure you know there's a lot of buzz going on around edition 9, and we've received many questions from our customers in the past about around a summary of changes document, implementation dates, and general guidance information. So can you just speak to a moment about this? What have you done, and where can our customers access this info?
So we're working on the code change document. So every time we have a major change, we do post our code change document. And this one will go number by number. So where is in edition 9 and where was it in edition 8.1? So don't worry about those of you that were worried about the number change. You should be able to have a really good understanding of how the code was rearranged, because like I said, we consolidated some elements and you might be like, where did that code requirement go? But it is probably slipped in with a different code requirement. So we'll be having that published, the code change document with the codes themselves. The guidance documents will take a little bit longer time. One thing that we are doing is working on tip sheets, which is more topic specific, less code specific. So, it's more about food safety culture versus 2.1.1.2, so we want to focus on those topic specific guidance. And we still have guidance documents published, but they won't be published with the code. We're really focusing on tip sheets and answering those topics that we have the most frequently asked questions about. And I think I have, so that's, and everything will be published, the codes tomorrow, and then code change documents down the line. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks, Leanne. That'll be super helpful to everybody to have those.
Yeah.
So follow up to this, we know there are several changes to the edition referencing the audit days and stage 1 assessments. Can you help us understand what got removed?
Yeah, so that was, as I mentioned before in part A, stage 1 audits was removed from the SQF code for initial certifications. Some of the CBs felt that it was a distraction and an unnecessary cost for the sites to first have that desk audit. Some CBs really liked the desk audit because they were the ones that, you know, they were the ones that they saw it as almost like a pre-assessment to get a better understanding if the site was truly going to be prepared for that on-site audit. But it doesn't take it away, it just gives it the flexibility. So the CB can still do those stage 1 audits. They just don't have to record it as part of the, as in ReposiTrak. And it's not really an audit, it would be a pre-assessment. So the audit would start then and commence when the auditor gets to the site or starts with any type of remote activities once the audit has commenced. So we just tried to put in a little flexibility in there. Like I said, some sites thought it was a distraction. And then I think I have one last question for you, which is regarding food safety culture. And that was the one question that we got a lot. How will your auditors, and what are you going to do to try and get consistent application and interpretation of that code requirement?
Yeah, great. So, you know, with food safety culture is this emerging field in the world of food safety audits, but it's an extremely important element. So our auditors interpret this element in a few different ways. They audit how the company is promoting food safety, and this may include if the company has an open door policy for feedback from all employees, and if the company has a suggestion box or another way to give input. The auditors would also look at if there are any rewards or bonuses given around food safety metrics, like the reduction in CCP deviations or successfully passing an SQF audit. And finally, they may look at if proper financial backing is given for staff to be trained or proper repairs are made to the machinery and buildings. It directly correlates with management commitment, because without senior management participating in food safety meetings, complaints, and putting time and money towards food safety goals, then food safety culture may not be achieved.
Yep. Yeah, so it's going to take a lot for us to make sure that we have good, consistent application of that code requirement and a good understanding why and an interpretation why from the site's perspective.
Yeah, that's very true. So I appreciate this little chat today, and I'll be happy to pass it over to Amy for question and answers.
Great, thank you guys so much for all that info. Just really quick before we get into the live Q&A, I did want to just share with you all some of our upcoming webinars on other various topics. And you can register for any of these as well as a bunch more that couldn't fit on one slide from our website up at www.pjrfsi.com. And all of our webinars are free to register, but space can be limited, so make sure you get registered ASAP. All right, let me go ahead and open the question panel here. As I said before, please get those questions in. We'll try to take care of as many as we can. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but hopefully you guys can stick around for some of these questions. So let's see what we've got here. All right, we've got one question that I can personally answer here, and I apologize if I mispronounce any names here, from Meenakshi. Meenakshi wonders if there is going to be a webinar attendance email or certificate. Meenakshi, there should be a follow-up email that automatically is sent out confirming that you did attend. We do not offer any certificates following the webinars, but if you're looking for some sort of proof that you attended, there should be an automatic follow-up email. If you don't get one, we can verify that you were on the call. All right, we do have a question. Leanne, you should probably answer this one from Meenakshi as well regarding 2.6.1.2 on label reconciliation. You're wondering, is this specific to in-house printing of labels?
It would be to any label. So it is really for ensuring that the correct package with the correct label. So it's about product identification and ensuring that that the correct product is in the correct package. So it could be all the way through your process. Again, identification hasn't changed, but it's more about what are the procedures in order to ensure that there's the right product at the end of the line. And making sure that the label is reconciled and any inconsistencies that were investigated. So it could be for in-house printing of labels, it could be for pre-printing of labels, and especially during product changeovers. So that's really what it is. It's at any, it could be for any type of label that's printed, whether on site or off site.
All right, great. We've got a question here from Joe, kind of a two-parter regarding ambient air testing. First part, what would make a site high risk for testing ambient air? And is ambient air testing required for high care areas?
So the ambient air testing is now under 11.7, which is high risk processes. So if the site is a high risk process, has a high risk process. So ready to eat foods is typically a high risk process, or if you have raw to ready to eat areas, so those high risk, high care areas. And any of those processes that are under controlled conditions. So like if there's a kill step and it's going into that processing area, that's when it would be deemed whether it be high risk. So you would have that determined by your certification body and by your auditor if you're a high risk process. So that's under 11.7.1. So it really kind of all depends on your process. So if you're under that high risk process, then those requirements would be applicable to you, including ambient air testing. So again, it's risk-based. So if it's in high risk area, like any of those high care, high risk areas, it should be tested. The ambient air should be tested at least annually, and that's our in the code requirement to confirm that it does not pose a risk to food safety.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Leanne. Let's see, we've got a question here from Ashley. Ooh, and you might like this one, Leanne. Ashley would like to know, from your perspective within SQF, how have you liked or disliked the whole virtual element of what's happened due to COVID?
Oh my gosh, I have a love-hate relationship with COVID. So I love wearing sweatpants, I'll be honest, so that part I love, and I love the not traveling part and spending more time with family. But there's, as you can imagine, the not traveling part works for everybody. Auditors, the visitor policies and sites, there's been audit disruptions. And so the challenge for us is to ensure that we can maintain some consistency in the audit process. So the remote audits that we have put into place, I think, really meet those objectives, especially the hybrid ones. I have a lot of confidence in. The reason why we did that hybrid approach, where we say, part can be done offsite, part can be done on-site, and is to minimize that contact. So we tried to minimize the one-on-one and embrace the personal space and the social distancing that's required. So auditors and sites have great policies in place: masks, PPE, social distancing, creative ways to interview using earbuds or radios or talking outside, and then using and utilizing the remote activities to conduct some of those one-on-one interviews or reviewing documents, and those closed space kind of activities for the audit. And, I think with technology, it's only going to get better. So we got to start somewhere. And I think this is a great way to start. And I think the pandemic has accelerated it 100-fold, but we have to start better. I mean, where were we? I think like 15 years ago is when the smartphone was invented, believe it or not. It's not like we've had these our whole life. Or, landlines is when, internet, and now we're on Wi-Fi and hotspots. And so there is so much opportunity out there that we have to start somewhere. And I'm really excited about where remote audits are. I think that we can really focus on the risks when the auditor gets on site, even post-pandemic. So the policies we put in place for the remote audit activities that are in the code, benchmarked by GFSI and recognized by GFSI, are there for permanent, are there to improve the audit process. The fully remote audit process that we just published is not recognized by GFSI. It's only in terms of extraordinary events like this pandemic. It's not something that would be my first choice at all. And our preference would be GFSI all the way, because that's what retailers want. That's what our stakeholders want. The buyers want, is that GFSI recognized certificate. But I'm excited.
Yeah, no, great. That last bit you had to say about, virtual options continuing into the future actually answered a follow-up question regarding whether it would remain permanent. So that's great. Let's see. We have a question here from Christy looking for some clarification. Christy would like a clarification of a permanent site employee with an explanation of absence with an operation that is 7 days a week.
Permanent site employee with, I didn't catch.
An explanation of absence, in quotes, with an operation that is 7 days a week. So Christy, I don't know if you could clarify a little bit more on that question, and we can definitely come back to you.
Yeah, so just I'm sure they're talking about the SQF practitioner, and what we want is that person to be fully employed by the site. So it's hard to put that in the code, to be honest. So our intent, and I like to talk about the intention behind that code requirement, because the intention is that the consultant isn't running and writing that food safety plan for the site, that site has, and that's why the practitioner is under management commitment. Because in our opinion, in the interpretation of that code requirement, it's the management's responsibility to have the right people in place with the right competencies at all time, even backup personnel. So food safety doesn't, they don't take a break when or vacation when practitioner goes on vacation. There needs to be some type of recognition and identified employee at the site that is committed and knows the food safety program, the SQF program, can react to these situations. And that's the intent behind that one. So it's hard to write a code requirement that's interpreted the same way. So I do like to speak to the intent on some of those code requirements. So hopefully that answered Christy's question.
Yeah, she did just submit a follow-up question. Does the SQF practitioner, have to be present the entire time that the plant is running?
You know what? Not necessarily. I don't want to say like they can't go out to lunch or, if they're sick one day, but that's what the backup practitioner is for, so that there is the presence. So I don't want to just look at it as black and white on the paper. Instead, that's why I speak to the intent of the code requirement. So who there knows food safety, if there's an incident. So again, I keep saying, the practitioner's role and responsibility is to implement, maintain, and sustain the food safety system at the site. So if the practitioner's not there and there's a food safety incident, how is that being managed? And that's really the intent behind it. That's why we want that person to be fully employed. So we don't want to say a full-time employee, because that designates amount of hours each week. And it could be a part-time employee. It could be that person could have a many hats because of the size of the site and the number of employees. But bottom line, who is responsible for food safety? Who makes those decisions? You can't have a consultant come in and write a food safety plan and then hope for the best. And that's the intent behind that requirement. It's the commitment of that site to dedicate that person to ensure that the food safety system is consistently implemented.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Christy. Let's see, we've got a question here from, and I apologize if I mess up anyone's name, from Jatin. And the question is regarding how to handle new auditor onboarding, specifically for witness or shadow audits where sites are not allowing them with principal auditors.
Yeah, oh gosh, that is, you know what, I think you should just let me know what you think, because honestly, I don't have a solution. I think that's one for Lauren, to be honest. I don't know, Lauren, I know that's a huge challenge for certification bodies to get, we have auditors, so many auditors, good auditors ready to audit, but can't get a witness audit in. So I think maybe Lauren, you could take that one.
Yeah, sure. So, we are also trying our best to get new auditors in, as we need new auditors with the, audits coming up that are been extended and postponed. So we definitely feel the need to get new people in, but it has definitely been a challenge. We are trying to locate local auditors where we can, so as a lot of sites may allow an additional auditor if they're not flying, or if it's something local or following corporate policy. But it is definitely tough, because to get in one auditor can be a challenge. To get in two, it makes it even harder. But we are doing it. It just is just being a little bit slower than we typically would want.
All right, great. Let's see what other questions we've got here. All right, we've got a question from Eric. This is a bit of a long one, so let me know if you need me to repeat any parts of it, Leanne. Eric asks, would the food safety culture 2.1.1.2, would you like to audit it as a policy, program, or other? Would there be a form to fill out, daily, weekly, monthly, or more of an annual training sign-off regarding an employee's understanding of the culture?
Yeah, again, it's how is the auditor going to audit against food safety culture? So when you look at the requirements under food safety culture, as I said, many of them were already part of the SQF code, adequate resources, and ensuring that there's enough staff competencies, enough staff to execute the job at the site. And that, I think for us, it's about understanding, you're going to look at the policy, this auditor will look at the policy, look at the components of that policy, ensure that they've, are embraced by all the employees, look at the communication styles. So are there huddles? Are there, images? What is bringing food safety top of mind at that site? The documentation part, it's the policy has to be documented and implemented, and that the food safety policy isn't really saying that the site needs to have a policy, so there has to be the establishment, documentation, and communication of the objectives and performance measures for as it around food safety. So there are some pieces, but there has to be some type of support to say that this is what we do on a monthly basis, a weekly basis, an annual basis, for food safety and demonstration of that food safety culture. So it's a really good question. And maybe Lauren, I know you had a really good response when I asked you how auditors were going to audit against that, so I don't know if there's anything you would have to add to that as well.
It's one thing we all talk about is when you can kind of tell when food safety culture is not implemented in a system, but it is, you have that feeling when you're doing the audit when things are just not being supported. But sometimes it's hard to, pinpoint that. So you definitely have to look in those areas of, how the company supports and how it's communicated. I think it's going to be something that we just continue to, develop over time with the site and the auditing, as opposed to, yes, we have to have this, let's check the box off. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Going back to Christy's earlier question regarding SQF practitioners being on site, Therese has a follow-up question. Can the practitioner backup be based at another plant but have oversight at the main plant in question?
I would imagine. You would have to demonstrate to your auditor how that is working. It depends where the plant is, depends where, the type of process you have, the issues that you see, it's all kind of like I said, the intent is that there is some type of oversight. So does that person have to be planted in their office in that site, or can they jog back and forth between the sites? You know, again, how doable is that, and is it meeting the intent behind that SQF, behind the code requirement? So I'm not saying you can't, or I'm not saying you can, because I just really, it's dependent on the auditor, but I understand what you're saying. And you could say, you know, if this practitioner doesn't show up here, then the person that runs this plant is going to take over this plant, and so on and so forth. So again, it's then the intent of meeting that code requirement and how you demonstrate that to the auditor.
So it's not a yes or a no, it's a if it works.
Yeah, if it works, you know, it depends on so many, not so many, but like how far is the site, and what do you produce, and how many issues in that site versus this site, and you know, so you know, why is they based off of that site and not in the site that the practitioner is not in, you know. So there's a lot of questions that I would ask as an auditor to see how that would work, but auditors should be auditing against the intent, as well as the code requirements itself, to make sure that the site is, you know, it's, we always say good sense and good science, you know, so how is that working at the site?
All right, awesome. We're coming to the last couple of questions we've got here. So just a reminder, if you had any clarification you wanted to get, now is the time, send those questions in. If you have some really specific situational questions, I know I did see one come in with some pretty detailed questions regarding specific processes at a business. If you have any questions like that, I would encourage you to reach out directly. I did also notice just now, unfortunately, we have a small spelling typo on Leanne's email address. There's one F missing from her last name in the lchuboff@sqfi.com. So just make sure if you do decide to email her with a question or a follow-up, just add an extra F in there. All right, so we've got one more question here that I can see, unless we get some more in. This one is from Maddie. Maddie is wondering if unannounced audits have resumed yet.
No.
That was simple. Can I take it a step further and say, do we know when unannounced audits may resume?
No, we don't. Do you know when the pandemic's going to end? So like that.
Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to be determined.
Oh yeah, so like a lot of things, it's up in the air. All right, so if there's no more questions that are going to be coming in the next minute, I'll just encourage everybody, if you came in late or if you wanted to share the presentation or the recording with anyone else at your organization, the recording and the slides will both be available from PJRFSI.com, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the webinar broadcast. So any closing words of wisdom, Leanne, Lauren, or Paul, anyone?
I just personally want to say thank you very much to everyone who joined the call, especially all of our listeners, as well as Leanne and Lauren as well. We certainly appreciate it. We understand how busy everyone is, and I just want to say thank you.
Yes, I want to say thank you too to Perry Johnson. The more awareness we get around Edition 9, so hosting this webinar is fantastic. I also, you know, I really want to say thanks for the partnership and the support that Perry Johnson has given us throughout the years. You guys are fantastic to work with, always accommodating, and appreciate all that you do. So one thing that, you know, if you could take away anything from this webinar, I really want you to look at the code requirements and how you look at the interpretation of the code requirements. So no matter where you are, whether you're a site, an auditor, a consultant, a trainer, understanding the intent behind the code requirements is the biggest step to your journey. And so understanding what the why behind those code requirements really helps you design your policies and procedures, helps you understand how you want to audit against that site. And so it's really looking at it from the intent behind it. So, you know, just take a look at the code changes, the reasoning behind the code changes, and you should be very successful then.
All right, Lauren, any parting words?
Just want to thank everybody for their time, and so excited about Edition 9 and the SQF conference next week.
Yes, thank you. Hope to see
Yeah,
you there.
absolutely. Yeah, hope to see everyone at SQF.
Yeah.
And I'll just say there were no more questions that came in, so I think we'll just wrap things up for today. Thank you all for taking the time to attend. Thank you, Leanne, for all the awesome information and being so willing to work with us and answer all of these questions that we got. And
Sure.
I will just wish you all good health and happiness, and we'll see you hopefully all on another webinar. Have a great day.